Okay, this is the last reading article in the Tucci Read streaming series, at least for now. This one is, I think all of this started because I had a bunch of, articles that were just open, and I specific Exploration Station Meditation for Kids series, and I wound up making the series and just not looking at these articles, but I want to look at them now. Do better now. This one off of Wikipedia is called Acceptance and Commitment Therapy, or ACT. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that this is not related to the ACT college several high school students need to take, but long and short, here we go. Acceptance and Commitment Therapy, ACT, typically pronounced as the word ACT, is a form of psychotherapy as well as a branch of clinical behavioral analysis. It is an empirically based uses acceptance and mindfulness strategies, along with commitment and behavior change strategies to increase psychological flexibility. Uh, Comprehensive by Stephen C. Hayes, around 1980 to integrate features of cognitive therapy and behavior analysis, especially behavior analytic data on the often negative effects of verbal rules and how they might be ameliorated. Okay. ACT protocols vary with target behavior and the setting. For example, in behavioral health, a brief is acceptance. Life break to move forward, move toward valued behavior. Acceptance and commitment, not to overreact to them, and not to avoid situations that cause them. In which more understanding of one's emotions leads to a better understanding of the truth. In ACT, to take another step toward what matters, e.g., values and meaning. Technique, basic. ACT is developed within a functional contextual comprehensive theory of language and cognition derived from behavior analysis, based on B.F. Skinner's philosophy of radical behaviorism. ACT differs from some try to teach people to control their thoughts, feelings, sensations, memories, and other private events. ACT teaches them to just notice, especially previously unwanted ones. ACT helps the individual get in contact with a transcendent sense of self. And then use them as the basis for action, bringing more vitality and meaning to the process while increasing flexibility. While Western psychology has typically operated under the healthy normality assumption, states that ACT assumes that the psychological processes of a normal human mind are often destructive. The core conception of ACT is that psychological suffering is cognitive entanglement and resulting psychological rigidity. that leads to a failure to take needed behavioral steps in accord with core values. Understand what they mean. In the acronym FEAR, fusion with your thoughts, evaluation of experience, reason giving for your behavior. Healthy value direction, take action. Core principles. ACT commonly employs 6 core principles. 1. Cognitive diffusion, learning methods to reduce the tendency to thoughts, images, emotions, and memory. Is that reify? Yeah, it's reify. 2. Private. Contact with the present moment, awareness of the here and now, experienced with openness, interest, and receptiveness, e.g. 4. The observing self accessing a transcendent sense of which is changing. 5. Values, discovering what is most important to oneself. 6. According to values and carrying them out responsibly in the service of a meaningful life. Correlational evidence has found that absence of psychological forms of psychopathology. On average, account for 29% of the variance in psychopathology. General mental health, depression, anxiety at baseline, depending on the measure using correlational methods. So there's no hard causation to that. 2012 68 laboratory-based studies on ACT components has also provided support for the link between psychological flexibility concepts and the website of the Association for Contextual Behavioral Science states that there were over 13 ACT, over 550 meta studies of the ACT literature as of January 2025. Oh, so this is fucking recent. Okay. Organizations that have acceptance and commitment therapy include, as of March 2022, Society of Clinical Psychology, World Health Organization. Okay, this is just a list, but it's got etc. History. In 2006, only about 30 randomized clinical trials and controlled time series evaluating ACT were known. In 2011, the number had doubled to more than 60 ACT randomized control trials, and in 2023, there were more than 1,000 randomized controlled trials of ACT worldwide. A 2008 meta-analysis concluded that the evidence was still too limited for ACT to be considered a supported treatment. Analysis found that the outperformed CBT except for treating depression and anxiety. A 2015 review found that ACT was better than placebo for anxiety disorders, depression, and addiction. And its effectiveness was similar to traditional treatments like cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. The author research method in 2020, a review of the meta-analysis examined 20 meta-analyses that included 133 studies and 12,477 participants. Holy shit. Uh, the authors concluded ACT is and trans diagnostic groups. To be clear, I think trans diagnostic is transgender stuff. Because I don't think stigmatizing trans. Results also showed that ACT was generally superior to inactive. If we got a lot of initials. WHO released an ACT-based self-help course, Self-Help Plus, for a group of people who have through or are living through adversity. As of July 2023, there are a systematic of meta-analyses about interventions for depressive symptoms in people living with chronic pain concluded acceptance and commitment therapy, based psychotherapy for fibromyalgia, showed the most robust effects for implementation in clinical practice. Professional organization. This is a fucking long article. Jesus, no wonder I saved it for last. The Association for Contextual Behavioral Science is committed to research and development in the area of ACT, RFT, and contextual behavioral science more generally. As of 2023, it had over 8,000 members worldwide, about half outside of the United States. It holds annual world conference meetings each summer, uh, alternating between North America, Europe, and South America. The Association for Behavioral Analysis International, ABAI, has a special interest group. ABAI, ABA colon I. Okay. ABAI groups for autism and behavioral medicine. ABAI served as the core intellectual hub for behavioral. AI sponsors one multi-track in the US, one specific to autism, and one international. For behavioral and cognitive therapy also has an interest group in behavior and which focuses on clinical behavior analysis presented at ABCT and other mainstream CT organizations. Association Therapies, BABCP, has a large group in AC. Doctors, behavior analysts who belong to the Psychological Association 25. ACT has been called a commonly used treatment with empirical support. That's a lot of initials, like I said. Anyway, similarities. ACT, dialectical therapy, is going freaking around the world covering the same thing. Anyway, DBT. Analytics therapy, FAP, mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, MBCT, and other acceptance and mindfulness-based approaches have been by Stephen Hayes under the name. Ooh, drama, 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 drama. For example, David Dozois and Aaron know and that there are a variety of extensions of cognitive therapy. For example, Jeffrey Young's schema therapy did not name his innovations the third wave or the third generation of cognitive behavior therapy. According to Hayes, first wave behavior therapy commenced in the 1920s based on Pavlov's classical respondent conditioning and operated consequences. The second wave emerged in the irrational beliefs, attitudes, or depressogenic attributions. In the late 1980s, empirical limit. The second wave gave rise to Stephen Hayes' ACT theory, which modified the focus of all behavior away from the content or form toward the content, toward the content or form toward the context in which it occurs. People's rigid ideas about themselves, their lack of focus on what is important in their life, and their struggle to change feeling troublesome only serve to create greater distress. ABCT address as follows. Grounded in an empirical principle focused approach, the third wave of behavioral and cognitive psychology, not just their form, and thus tend to emphasize contextual and in addition to more direct and didactic ones. These treatments tend to seek the narrowly defined problems and to emphasize the relevance of the issues they examine. The third wave formulates and synthesizes previous generations of behavior and carries them forward into questions, issues, and domains previously addressed primarily by other traditions in hopes of improving outcomes. A lot of fucking thoughts. Let's get this up. There we go. I'm just moving my standing desk. Okay, there we go. All right. I'm only about halfway through. Jesus Christ. ACT has also been adapted to create a non-therapy version of the same processes called acceptance and commitment training. This training process, oriented towards the development of mindfulness, acceptance, and valued skills, is not in non-clinical settings such as businesses or schools, has also been investigated in a handful of research studies with good preliminary results. The emphasis of ACT on ongoing present moment awareness, value directions, and commitment action is similar to other psychotherapeutic approaches that, unlike ACT, are not as focused on outcome research or consciously linked to a basic behavioral science program, including approaches such as Gestalt theory, Morita theory, and others. Hayes and other colleagues themselves stated in their book that introduced ACT that many or even most of the techniques in ACT have been borrowed from elsewhere, from the human potential movement Eastern traditions, behavior therapy, mystical traditions, and the like. Oh boy. Now I'm starting to get worried here. Wilson, Hayes, and Bird explored at length the compatibilities between ACT and the 12-step treatment of addictions and argued that unlike most other psychotherapies, both approaches can be implicitly or explicitly integrated due to their broad commonalities. Both approaches endorse acceptance as an alternative to unproductive control. ACT emphasizes the hopelessness of relying on ineffectual strategies to control private experience. Similarly, the 12-step approach emphasizes the acceptance of powerlessness over addiction. Both approaches encourage a broad life reorientation rather than a narrow focus on the elimination of substance use, and both place great value on the long-term project of building of a meaningful life aligned with ACT and 12 of cultivating a transcendent sense of self within an unconventional, individualized spirituality. Finally, they both openly accept the paradox that acceptance is a necessary condition for change, and both encourage a playful awareness of the limitations of human thinking. Criticism. The textbook Systems of Psychotherapy, a trans-theoretical analysis, includes various criticisms of third-wave behavioral therapy, including ACT, from the perspectives of other systems of psychotherapy, including the complaint that third-wave therapies display an annoying tendency to gather effective methods from other traditions and label them as their own. Well, yeah, Hayes flat out said that he was cribbing from other people. So yeah, evidence-based practice. Oh shit. Hey Siri, stop. Evidence. In a 2012 blog post, psychologist J. Coyne criticized the process and studies initiated by the APA to favorably evaluate ACT for the treatment of psychosis in the labeling system for evidence-based medicine. In particular, it relied on only one full randomized trial supplemented by a pilot study and a feasibility study, despite the criteria for strong evidence. Excuse me. Requiring a treatment to be supported by many such trials. The main study used, Bach and Hayes 2002, was alleged to not to have clearly specified its hypothesis that ACT reduces rehospitalization in advance of the conducted analysis, a practice in which researchers retrospectively cherry-picked the largest claims supporting change post-treatment. In 2016, this and other critiques were cited by William O'Donoghue and co-authors in a paper on ACT, Weak and Pseudo Tests, adding that while no doubt there are studies of ACT that are quite good, they had examined 3 trials of ACT that were weakened and thus made easier to pass. And they listed over 30 ways in which such trials were weak or pseudo-tests, drawing on concepts from Karl Popper's philosophy of science and Popper's critique of psychoanalysis as impossible to falsify. Impossible to falsify? O'Donoghue and colleagues advocated Popperian severe testing instead. Excessive promotion over other therapies. Excuse me. Whew. Oh, God. I'm boring myself. In 2013, psychologist Jonathan W. Cantor said that Hayes and colleagues argue that empirical clinical psychology is hampered in its efforts to alleviate human suffering and present contextual behavioral science, CBS, to address the basic philosophical, theoretical, and methodological shortcomings of the field. CBS represents a host of good ideas, but at times the premise of CBS is obscured by excessive promotion of acceptance therapy and relational frame theory and of earlier cognitive in the absence of clear logic and empirical support. Nevertheless, Cantor concluded that the ideas of CBS, RFP, and ACT deserve serious consideration by the mainstream community and have great potential to shape a truly progressive clinical science to guide clinical practice. So here's the thing. This popped in my mind. So I know a lot of, woo-woo people, people who love their, their supplements and their sage and their cleansing of auras and stuff like that. And they're all like, oh, modern medicine, looks down on alternative medicine and like, because it can't be tested. That's one of the arguments I hear all the time. And here, clearly, we're seeing like, hey, these theories of alternative practices can frequently be tested, but they can't be proven to work. And here, I think we have a sense of like someone like this Hayes guy, pride of authorship is like, hey, this is my idea. I think it's great. You should think it's great too. But this is like, this can be tested. It's not passing snuff. It's not passing the sniff test. And as a result, it's being demoted or should be, taken seriously, but taken with a grain of salt. Anyway, that just popped into my head. Excuse me. Authors of a 2013 paper comparing ACT to cognitive therapy, CT, conducted that although preliminary research on ACT is promising, we suggest that its proponents need to be appropriately humble in their claims. In particular, like CT, ACT cannot yet make strong claims that its unique and theory-driven intervention components are active ingredients in its effects. The authors of the paper suggested that many of the assumptions of ACT are analytical and cannot be directly pitted against one another in experimental tests, unquote. In 2012, ACT appeared to be about as effective as standard CBT, with some meta-analyses showing small differences in favor of ACT and others not. For example, a meta-analysis published by Francisco Ruiz in 2012 looked at 16 studies comparing ACT to standard CBT. ACT failed to separate from CBT on effect sizes for anxiety. However, modest benefits were found with ACT compared to CBT for depression and quality of life. The author found a separation between ACT and CBT on the primary outcome, a heterogeneous class of 14 separate outcome measures aggregated into the effect size analysis. However, the study is limited by the highly heterogeneous nature of the outcome variables used in the analysis, which tends to increase the number needed to treat NNT to replicate the effect size reported. More limited measures, such as depression, anxiety, and quality of life, decrease the NNT, making the analysis more clinically relevant. And on these measures, ACT did not outperform CBT. A 2012 clinical trial by Foreman et al. Found that Becky and CBT obtained better results than ACT. Several theoretical and empirical concerns have arisen in response to the ascendancy of ACT. One theoretical concern was that ACT's primary authors and the corresponding theories of human behavior relational frame theory, RFT, and functional contextualism, FC, recommend their approach as the proverbial holy grail of psychological therapies. In 2012, in the preface to the second edition of the primary authors of ACT clarified that ACT has not been created to undercut the traditions from which it came, nor does it claim to be a panacea. Whew! And that's the end of the article. Wow, that was wild, actually. I did not think we were going to go in all those directions on just an article on what is essentially meditation practices. But it was interesting. It was very interesting. It shows you that politics, I guess, is everywhere. You know, you look around. I used to say if you get, 3 people or more in a church, let alone some other organizations, you're going to get drama. You know, that's just a fact of life. That's a fact of the matter. You're going to get drama and power politics. And apparently we have that in the medical and other therapy fields. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. This is going to conclude the Tucci streaming series for a while. But yeah, hope you subscribe and have a beautiful, wonderful day.